Sara Williams had learned to make herself invisible long before she ever stepped through the glass doors of Willowbrook High School. At 17, she possessed the kind of understated presence that made teachers glance over attendance sheets. Twice and classmates forget her name by third period. Standing barely 5'3" with shoulder-length brown hair that she kept pulled back in a simple ponytail, Sara had perfected the art of blending into backgrounds. Her worn denim jacket and scuffed sneakers suggested nothing more threatening than another military kid trying to survive yet another school transfer. What nobody at Willowbrook knew was that Sara had spent the last decade training under the watchful eye of Major Victoria Williams, her mother, whose Special Forces background had shaped every aspect of Sara's upbringing. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The October morning air carried the scent of dying leaves. As Sara navigated the crowded hallway, her eyes automatically cataloging exits and potential hazards, the way most teenagers noticed who was dating whom. Her father's death in a training accident when she was 7 had left her mother fiercely protective, determined to ensure Sara could handle whatever life threw at her. Keep your head down, gather intelligence, adapt to the environment, her mother's voice echoed in Sara's mind as she located her locker. The familiar weight of her tactical pen in her pocket provided comfort, though she doubted Willowbrook High would require anything more dangerous than surviving cafeteria food. The first sign of trouble came during second period English when Sara accidentally made eye contact with Chloe Benson. Chloe sat in the back row like a queen surveying her domain, perfectly styled blonde hair catching the fluorescent light. Her designer clothes and confident posture screamed privilege and power, while her followers hung on every word she whispered. "Who's the new girl?" Chloe's voice carried just enough volume to be heard by half the class, her tone suggesting Sara was some interesting specimen to be examined. Sara quickly looked away, focusing on her copy of The Great Gatsby while her peripheral vision tracked Chloe's movements. She recognized the predatory interest in the girl's eyes, the way a hunter might study prey before deciding whether it was worth the effort. During lunch, Sara chose a table near the emergency exit, her back to the wall as she ate her sandwich and observed the cafeteria's social ecosystem. The popular kids dominated the center tables, their laughter loud and performative. Athletes clustered near the windows, while the academic achievers occupied the quieter corners. Sara had navigated enough schools to understand the unspoken rules, the invisible boundaries that kept each group in their designated spaces. "You're the new girl, right?" The voice belonged to Lily Marks, a soft-spoken brunette with kind eyes and paint-stained fingers. She hesitated beside Sara's table, clutching her lunch tray like a shield. "Sara Williams," Sara replied, gesturing to the empty chair across from her. "You're welcome to sit." Lily glanced nervously toward Chloe's table before accepting the invitation. "I'm Lily. My mom teaches art here, so I kind of know everyone." She lowered her voice, "including who to avoid." Sara followed Lily's gaze to where Chloe was holding court, her inner circle of Mia Harper and Jessica Walsh laughing at something their leader had said. "Let me guess," Sara said quietly. "Queen Bee?" "More like Queen Wasp," Lily muttered, then immediately looked guilty for the comment. "I mean, she's not all bad, just ... territorial about new students." Sara filed this information away, recognizing the fear in Lily's voice. Her mother had taught her to identify weakness in others, not to exploit it, but to understand the dynamics at play. Lily was clearly uncomfortable with Chloe's behavior, but lacked the confidence to speak out. The rest of Sara's first day passed without incident, though she felt Chloe's eyes tracking her movements between classes. As she gathered her books from her locker, Sara noticed Chloe approaching with her usual entourage. "Sara, right?" Chloe's smile was sharp as broken glass. "I'm Chloe Benson." I like to welcome new students personally. That's nice of you, Sara replied evenly, continuing to organize her backpack while maintaining awareness of her surroundings. Willowbrook has certain traditions, Chloe continued, her tone carrying an underlying threat. Social dynamics that newcomers need to understand. I'd hate for you to accidentally step on anyone's toes. Sara closed her locker and faced Chloe directly, keeping her expression neutral. I'm not looking for trouble. I just want to finish school and graduate. Smart girl, Chloe purred, though her eyes remained cold. I think we'll get along just fine. As Chloe and her followers walked away, Sara caught Lily watching from across the hall, her expression troubled. Sara gave her a small nod of acknowledgement before heading toward the exit, her mind already processing the encounter. That evening, Sara helped her mother unpack boxes in their new rental house. The familiar rhythm of organizing and establishing territory providing comfort after the day's tensions. How was school? Victoria asked, her trained eye immediately picking up on Sara's subtle signs of stress. Typical social dynamics, Sara replied, folding her clothes with military precision. Alpha female establishing dominance, followers competing for approval, outsiders trying to stay invisible. Victoria paused in her unpacking. Anyone giving you trouble? Nothing I can't handle, Sara said, which was true but incomplete. She'd learned to recognize the difference between manageable challenges and genuine threats, and Chloe Benson fell somewhere in the gray area between the two. Remember what I taught you about tactical patience, Victoria said, understanding the subtext. Sometimes the best strategy is to let your opponent reveal their weaknesses before you act. Sara nodded, appreciating her mother's wisdom. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight she would plan and prepare, the way she'd been taught since childhood. The harassment began subtly, the way water slowly erodes stone. On her third day at Willowbrook, Sara was walking to her chemistry class when Chloe suddenly appeared beside her in the hallway, flanked by Mia and Jessica. Oops! Chloe exclaimed as she deliberately bumped into Sara's shoulder, sending her textbooks scattering across the polished floor. I'm so clumsy today. Maybe you should watch where you're going. Sara knelt to collect her scattered materials, her movements controlled and efficient while students stepped around her like she was an obstacle to be avoided. Her training kicked in, automatically assess the situation, gather intelligence, respond appropriately. This was psychological warfare, designed to establish dominance through public humiliation. Need help? Lily appeared at Sara's side, quickly, gathering the remaining books while shooting nervous glances at Chloe's group. Thanks, Sara said quietly, accepting the books while filing away the loyalty Lily had just demonstrated. It was a small gesture, but it revealed character under pressure. So sorry about that, Chloe called out with false sweetness as she continued down the hall. New students can be so unsteady on their feet. The laughter that followed felt like needles against Sara's skin, but she maintained her composure. Her mother had taught her that emotional reactions were weapons in the wrong hands, ammunition that could be used against her later. During lunch, Sara chose the same table as before, but this time Lily joined her without hesitation. I'm sorry about what happened, Lily said, her voice barely above a whisper. Chloe's just... She feels threatened by new people. Threatened? Sara asked, genuinely curious. By me? Lily glanced around nervously before leaning closer. You're different. Most new students either try to kiss up to her or they're obviously scared. You're just ... neutral. She doesn't know how to read you. Sara considered this information while eating her sandwich. Her mother had always emphasized the importance of intelligence gathering, understanding your environment before taking action. What happens to students who don't play her games? They get worn down, Lily admitted. Chloe's really good at making people feel invisible or worthless. She knows exactly how to push buttons without doing anything that would get her in trouble. With the administration. And you? Sara asked. How do you handle it? Lily's cheeks flushed. I keep my head down and try not to attract attention. I know that makes me a coward, but it makes you smart, Sara interrupted gently. Sometimes discretion is the better part of valor. The afternoon brought a new form of harassment. In a P history, Sara found herself seated behind Chloe, who had somehow managed to switch seats with another student. Throughout the lecture, Chloe would lean back in her chair, gradually pushing Sara's desk backward until Sara was nearly against the wall. When Sara tried to push back, Chloe would innocently straighten up, only to repeat the process minutes later. The teacher, Mr. Patterson, was too focused on his lecture about World War II tactics to notice the psychological warfare being conducted in his classroom. Sorry, Chloe whispered when Sara finally cleared her throat. I have terrible posture. My chiropractor says it's from all the stress of maintaining my GPA. Sara recognized the pattern plausible deniability wrapped around deliberate aggression. It was sophisticated bullying, the kind that required careful planning and patience to execute effectively. After school, Sara found herself walking beside Kyle Anderson, the quarterback who had been friendly but distant during her first few days. He was carrying his football gear and looked like he wanted to say something but wasn't sure how to start. Chloe, giving you trouble? He asked finally, his voice casual but his eyes serious. What makes you say that? Sara replied, testing whether Kyle was fishing for information or offering genuine concern. She's got a reputation, Kyle said, adjusting his equipment bag. Most people are too scared to call her out on it, but it doesn't mean they don't notice. And you, do you notice? Kyle's jaw tightened slightly. I notice a lot of things. But speaking up against the queen bee isn't exactly a career-enhancing move, if you know what I mean. Sara did know what he meant. Social hierarchies were maintained through a combination of fear and complicity, with most people choosing silence over confrontation. It was the same dynamic she'd observed in military units, where challenging authority required careful consideration of consequences. Thanks for the warning, Sara said as they reached the parking lot. Just be careful, Kyle replied. Chloe's not as untouchable as she thinks, but she's got more power than most people realize. That evening, Sara sat in her room reviewing her notes from the day. Not academic material, but behavioral observations. She'd filled 3 pages with details about Chloe's patterns, her followers' reactions, and the school's general social dynamics. Her mother knocked on the doorframe, carrying 2 cups of hot chocolate. Studying? Victoria asked, settling into the chair beside Sara's desk. Reconnaissance, Sara corrected, accepting the warm mug. I'm trying to understand the environment before I make any strategic decisions. Victoria smiled at her daughter's clinical approach. And what have you learned? The primary aggressor uses psychological tactics rather than physical intimidation, Sara reported. She's skilled at operating within the boundaries of acceptable behavior while maximizing emotional impact. Her followers are motivated by fear and social status rather than genuine loyalty. Sounds like someone who's never faced real consequences. For her actions, Victoria observed. Sara nodded, sipping her hot chocolate while staring at her notes. The question is whether I want to be the one to provide those consequences. That's always the question, isn't it? Victoria said. When do you stand up, and when do you wait for a better opportunity? What would you do? Sara asked. Victoria was quiet for a long moment. I'd gather more intelligence. Make sure I understood all the variables before committing to a course of action. And I'd remember that sometimes the best victories are the ones your opponent doesn't even realize they've lost. The tipping point came during lunch on Sara's second week at Willowbrook. She was carrying her tray toward her usual table when Chloe suddenly stood up from her seat, directly in Sara's path. The cafeteria seemed to sense the impending drama. Conversations quieting as heads turned toward the potential confrontation. Excuse me, Sara said politely, trying to step around Chloe. "Oh, I'm sorry," Chloe replied with exaggerated sweetness. "I didn't see you there. You're so forgettable." Sara felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that preceded conflict, but she kept her voice level. "Could you please move? I'd like to get to my table." "Your table?" Chloe's eyebrows rose in mock. "Surprise. I wasn't aware we were assigning seating. Maybe you should ask permission before claiming territory that doesn't belong to you." The cafeteria had grown completely silent now, students sensing blood in the water. Sara was acutely aware of the dozens of eyes watching, the way her next words would define how she was perceived for the rest of her time at Willowbrook. "I'm not claiming anything," Sara said calmly. "I'm just trying to eat lunch." "Then maybe you should learn some manners," Chloe snapped, her mask of sweetness finally slipping. "New students need to understand their place in the social order." Something in Chloe's tone, the casual cruelty, the assumption of superiority triggered memories of her mother's lessons about bullies and predators. Sara set her tray down on the nearest table and faced Chloe directly. "And what place would that be?" Sara asked, her voice carrying a quiet strength that made several students lean forward to hear better. Chloe's confidence faltered for just a moment, surprised by Sara's sudden willingness to engage. "At the bottom," she recovered quickly. "Where you belong." "I see," Sara said, nodding thoughtfully. "And who decided that, you?" "The natural order decided it," Chloe replied, gesturing to her followers who clustered behind her like a protective wall. "Some people are leaders, and others are followers. Some matter, and others don't." Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Sara studied Chloe's face, noting the slight tremor in her hands, the way her eyes kept darting to her audience. This wasn't confidence, it was performance, a carefully constructed facade designed to maintain power through intimidation. "You're absolutely right," Sara said quietly. "Some people do matter more than others. But I don't think you understand which category you fall into." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Chloe's face flushed red, her carefully maintained composure cracking. "What did you say to me?" Chloe's voice rose an octave. "I said you were right about the natural order," Sara replied, picking up her tray. "But I think you've misunderstood your position in it." With that, Sara walked calmly to her table, leaving Chloe standing in the middle of the cafeteria with her mouth open and her followers looking uncertain. The silence stretched for several heartbeats before conversations gradually resumed, but Sara could feel the shift in the room's energy. Lily appeared at Sara's table moments later, her eyes wide with a mixture of admiration and terror. "I can't believe you just did that," Lily whispered. "Nobody talks to Chloe like that." "Maybe that's part of the problem," Sara replied, unwrapping her sandwich with steady hands despite the adrenaline still coursing through her system. "She's going to make your life hell," Lily warned. "Chloe doesn't forget, and she doesn't forgive." Sara looked up from her lunch to meet Lily's worried gaze. "Then I guess I'll have to be ready for whatever she brings." The rest of the day passed in a strange bubble of tension. Sara could feel eyes following her through the hallways, whispers tracking her movements like a shadow. By the time she reached her final class, the story had already morphed into legend, depending on who was telling it. Sara had either stood up to Chloe with dignity or had foolishly signed her own social death warrant in a PB biology. Sara found herself seated across from Mia Harper, one of Chloe's inner circle. Mia kept glancing at Sara throughout the class, her expression unreadable but troubled. "Can I ask you something?" Mia said as they packed up their notebooks after the bell. "Sure," Sara replied, noting the way Mia's hands shook slightly as she organized her materials. "Why did you do it? Why did you stand up to her like that?" Sara considered her answer carefully. "Because someone had to. Because staying silent wasn't making anything better." "But you barely know anyone here," Mia pressed. You don't have any friends to back you up, no social protection. It's basically suicide. Maybe, Sara agreed. But at least I'll know I didn't go down without a fight. Mia stared at her for a long moment. I wish I had your courage, she said finally, so quietly Sara almost didn't hear her. You do, Sara replied. You just haven't found the right moment to use it yet. After school, Sara was walking toward the parking lot when Kyle Anderson fell into step beside her. That was either really brave or really stupid, he said without preamble. Probably both, Sara admitted. But I'm tired of pretending that being cruel is the same thing as being powerful. Kyle nodded slowly. A lot of people are tired of it. They're just too scared to say so. What about you? Sara asked. Are you scared? Kyle's jaw tightened. I'm a coward, he said bluntly. I've watched Chloe tear people down for years, and I've never said anything because it wasn't happening to me. That doesn't make you a coward, Sara said. It makes you human. We all pick our battles. But you picked yours, Kyle pointed out. Even when you didn't have to, Sara shrugged. Maybe that's the difference between surviving and living. Eventually, you have to decide what you're willing to stand for. The retaliation came 3 days later, swift and calculated. Sara had stayed after school to make up a chemistry test she'd missed due to a doctor's appointment. And the hallways were mostly empty except for the distant sounds of basketball practice and drama club rehearsal. She was walking toward the main exit when she heard footsteps behind her, moving with purpose rather than casual pace. Sara's training kicked in automatically assess, adapt, survive. She turned to find Chloe approaching with Mia and Jessica, their expressions predatory in the dim afternoon light. Perfect timing, Chloe said, her voice carrying the satisfaction of a well-executed plan. I was hoping we'd get a chance to talk privately. Sara's eyes tracked the empty hallway, noting the distance to the nearest exit and the absence of any witnesses. This wasn't a coincidence. They had planned this carefully, waiting for the right moment to strike. What do you want? Sara asked, keeping her voice steady while her mind calculated options. I want to teach you about respect, Chloe replied, producing a length of rope from her backpack, and the consequences of forgetting your place. Sara's pulse quickened, but years of training kept her thinking clearly. 3 opponents, confined space, element of surprise in their favor. But they were amateurs, driven by emotion rather than tactical thinking. You're making a mistake, Sara said, backing toward the wall while keeping all 3 girls in sight. The only mistake was thinking you could embarrass me in front of the whole school. Chloe snarled, nodding to her followers. What happened next was swift and coordinated. Jessica moved to Sara's left while Mia circled right, herding her toward the supply closet at the end of the hallway. Chloe advanced directly, the rope ready in her hands. Sara allowed herself to be pushed backward, her mind racing through possibilities. She could fight. Her mother had taught her techniques that would neutralize all 3 girls in seconds. But violence would create more problems than it solved, and she wasn't ready to reveal that particular skill set. This is insane, Sara said, letting genuine fear creep into her voice. You can't just, we can do whatever we want, Chloe interrupted, shoving Sara hard enough to send her stumbling toward the closet. That's what you don't understand. This is our school, our rules. The closet door opened with a metallic screech, revealing a cramped space filled with cleaning supplies and maintenance equipment. The sharp smell of industrial chemicals made Sara's eyes water, but she was already cataloging the contents: bleach, ammonia, floor buffers, and most importantly, tools. Maybe a few hours in the dark will help you remember where you belong, Chloe said, binding Sara's wrists with the rope. The knots were tight but amateur, tied with emotion rather than skill. Sara offered no resistance as they pushed her into the closet, her body language radiating defeat while her mind worked furiously. The door slammed shut with a bang that echoed through the empty hallway, followed by the sound of something heavy being dragged against it. "Let me out," Sara called, injecting panic into her voice while testing the strength of the door. It was solid, but not insurmountable. "Maybe tomorrow," Chloe's voice came through the metal, muffled but audible. "If you're very, very sorry." Sara listened to their footsteps retreating down the hallway, waiting until she was certain they were gone before beginning her work. The rope around her wrists was restrictive, but not impossible to escape. Her mother had taught her to slip bonds using leverage and pressure points. Within minutes, her hands were free. Sara spent the next hour in the closet not panicking, but planning. She examined every inch of her prison, testing the door's hinges, checking for weak points in the walls, familiarizing herself with the contents. The space was small, but not claustrophobic. She'd been in tighter quarters during her mother's training exercises. Her phone had no signal, which meant she couldn't call for help. But she didn't need rescue, she needed strategy. The closet door opened outward, which meant the barricade was holding it shut from the outside. Sara found a crowbar among the maintenance tools and began working on the hinges, applying pressure with mechanical precision. The screws were old and yielded to steady, patient effort. By the time the night janitor arrived 2 hours later, Sara had already freed herself and was sitting calmly on the floor, studying the rope that had bound her wrists. "Hey, what are you doing in here?" the janitor asked, shocked to find a student in a supply closet. "Some students thought it would be funny to lock me in," Sara replied, rising to her feet with fluid grace. "But I found a way out." The janitor looked confused, glancing from Sara to the moved furniture that had barricaded the door. "You moved all this by yourself?" "I'm stronger than I look," Sara said, which was true in more ways than one. "Could you help me report this to the administration?" As Sara walked through the empty hallways beside the concerned janitor, she felt a profound shift in her understanding of the situation. Chloe and her followers had crossed a line from psychological bullying to physical imprisonment. They had escalated beyond what Sara could ignore or deflect. The game had changed, and so had the rules of engagement. The next morning brought an unexpected quiet to Willowbrook High. Sara walked through the hallways with newfound confidence, her posture straighter and her eyes alert. Students who had previously ignored her now watched with curiosity, whispers following in her wake. Chloe was noticeably absent from her usual throne in the cafeteria, though her followers clustered nervously at their table, shooting glances toward the entrance whenever someone entered. Sara chose her regular spot and ate her lunch in peaceful solitude, using the time to observe the social dynamics that had shifted in subtle but significant ways. "Are you okay?" Lily asked, appearing at Sara's table with obvious concern. "I heard. What happened yesterday?" "I'm fine," Sara replied, noting how Lily's worried expression masked something deeper, a spark of admiration mixed with fear. "More than fine, actually. But how did you get out?" The janitor said the door was barricaded from the outside. Sara's smile was enigmatic. "I'm resourceful when I need to be." Lily leaned closer, lowering her voice. "People are saying you're different now, that something changed." "Maybe they're right," Sara said, meeting Lily's gaze directly. "Maybe I'm tired of being underestimated." During third period, Sara found herself called to Principal Reed's office. The middle-aged man sat behind his desk looking uncomfortable, clearly uncertain how to handle the situation. "Miss Williams," he began, adjusting his glasses nervously. "I understand there was an incident yesterday involving some students locking you in a supply closet." "Yes, sir," Sara replied, her voice calm and factual. 3 students assaulted me and held me against my will for approximately 2 hours." Principal Reed winced at her clinical description. That's a very serious accusation. Do you have any proof of who was responsible?" "I have rope fibers under my fingernails from where they bound my wrists," Sara said, producing a small plastic bag from her pocket. And I'm sure the security cameras in the hallway captured at least part of the incident. The principal stared at the evidence bag, clearly not expecting such preparation from a teenage victim. Miss Williams, I have to ask, how exactly did you escape from a barricaded room? I used the tools available to me, Sara replied simply. My mother taught me to be self-reliant in difficult situations. Your mother... She's the new military science instructor, correct? Former Special Forces, Sara confirmed. She believes in teaching practical skills. Principal Reed made several notes on his pad, the wheels turning behind his eyes. I'll need to review the security footage and speak with the students involved. In the meantime, I want you to know that we take these matters very seriously at Willowbrook. I appreciate that, sir, Sara said, rising to leave. But I think you'll find that some problems solve themselves when the right pressure is applied. That afternoon, Sara found herself walking beside Kyle Anderson again, though this time he seemed more animated than usual. I heard about what happened, he said without preamble. And I heard about how you handled it. People talk, Sara replied neutrally. Yeah, they do. And what they're saying is that maybe Chloe bit off more than she could chew this time. Sara glanced at Kyle, noting the way his jaw was set with determination. What else are they saying? That maybe it's time someone stood up to her properly. That maybe you showed the rest of us what courage looks like. Courage is different for everyone, Sara said carefully. What matters is recognizing when it's time to act. Kyle nodded slowly. I've been thinking about that. About all the times I should have acted and didn't. And I think I'm ready to stop being a coward. Meanwhile, Chloe had spent the morning in damage control mode, her absence from class is strategic rather than coincidental. She sat in her car in the parking lot, her phone pressed to her ear as she spoke in urgent, hushed tones. I don't care what your dad says, she was telling Mia, who had called to report the growing whispers in the hallways. This is just temporary. Once people forget about yesterday, everything will go back to normal. But Chloe, Mia's voice was strained through the phone speaker. What if she talks? What if she tells them what we did? She won't, Chloe said with false confidence. She's too smart to start a war she can't win. But even as she spoke the words, Chloe felt a nagging doubt. There had been something different about Sara when she'd escaped from the closet, a calm certainty that suggested hidden depths. For the first time in years, Chloe felt the unfamiliar sensation of uncertainty. That evening, Sara sat in her room, making careful notes in a journal, documenting everything that had happened since her arrival at Willowbrook. Her mother knocked and entered, carrying 2 cups of tea. Rough day? Victoria asked, settling into the chair beside Sara's desk. Educational, Sara replied, accepting the warm cup. I learned that sometimes predators reveal themselves when they think they have you cornered. Victoria studied her daughter's face, noting the new steel in her eyes. And what did you learn about yourself? That I'm stronger than I thought, Sara said. And that I don't have to choose between being a victim and being a bully. There's a third option, which is... Sara's smile was sharp as a blade. Being someone who refuses to play their game at all. Victoria nodded approvingly. Just remember, sweetheart, the most dangerous opponents are the ones who don't realize they're already beaten. As Sara prepared for bed that night, she felt the weight of decision settling on her shoulders. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to define herself and her place in Willowbrook's social hierarchy. But tonight, she was simply a 17-year-old girl who had discovered that strength came in many forms, and that sometimes the quiet ones were the most dangerous of all. The storm was coming, and Sara Williams was ready to meet it head-on. The confrontation came during lunch on Thursday, 3 days after the closet incident. Sara was sitting with Lily when Chloe finally reappeared, her face flushed with anger and desperation. The cafeteria fell silent as she marched directly towards Sara's table, her remaining followers trailing behind like uncertain shadows. "You think you're so smart," Chloe snarled, slamming her hands on the table. "You think you can just waltz in here and ruin everything I've built?" Sara looked up calmly, her expression unreadable. "I think you've done that all by yourself." "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means," Sara said, rising to her feet with fluid grace, "that I know exactly who you are now. And so does everyone else." The cafeteria was dead silent, every student straining to hear what would happen next. Sara's voice carried clearly through the space, calm and measured. "You're not powerful, Chloe. You're afraid. You're so terrified of being nobody that you have to tear other people down to feel important. But real strength doesn't come from making others weak." Chloe's face turned red. "You don't know anything about me. I know you check your phone every 30 seconds because you're desperate for validation. I know you panic when people don't immediately respond to your texts. I know you practice your mean comments in the mirror because cruelty doesn't come naturally to you. It's learned behavior." The accuracy of Sara's observations hit like physical blows. Chloe's followers exchanged glances, seeing their leader stripped bare of pretense. "You're just a scared little girl playing dress-up," Sara continued, her voice never rising above conversational level. "And I'm done being afraid of you." The next morning brought chaos to Willowbrook High. Students who had spent years tiptoeing around Chloe suddenly found their voices. The carefully maintained social hierarchy began to crumble as whispered conversations filled the hallways. Mia Harper was the first to break ranks, approaching Sara at her locker with nervous determination. "I wanted to apologize," Mia said quietly. "For everything. For the closet, for all the times I stood by and watched." "Why now?" Sara asked, genuinely curious. "Because I realized I was more afraid of Chloe than I was of being alone. That's not really living, is it?" Sara smiled, the first genuinely warm expression she'd shown in weeks. "No, it's not, but it takes courage to admit that." Kyle Anderson also sought Sara out, his usual confidence replaced by something deeper respect mixed with determination. "I've been thinking about what you said," he told her as they walked to class together, "about choosing what to stand for." "And what did you decide?" "That I'm tired of being a bystander. Some of us are planning to talk to Principal Reed about the bullying problem. Would you be willing to help?" Sara considered this carefully. "I'll help, but not by being a victim. I'll help by showing people they don't have to be afraid." Principal Reed found himself dealing with a situation he'd never encountered before. Students were coming forward with stories of harassment, witnesses were speaking up, and the school's entire social dynamic was shifting. "Miss Williams," he said when he called Sara to his office again, "I have to ask, did you plan this?" "I planned to stand up for myself," Sara replied. "I didn't plan for other people to find their own courage. That was their choice." Chloe's last desperate gambit came on Friday afternoon. She cornered Sara in the empty art room after school, her eyes wild with the fury of someone watching their world collapse. "This is all your fault," Chloe hissed. "Everything was fine before you came here." "No," Sara said quietly, not turning around from the painting she was examining. "Everything was broken before I came here. I just refused to pretend otherwise. You've destroyed everything." Chloe's voice cracked with desperation. "My friends, my reputation, my entire life." Sara finally turned to face her, and Chloe was shocked by the compassion in her eyes. "I didn't destroy anything, Chloe. I just stopped enabling it. You don't understand. Without this, I'm nothing. I'm just another nobody." "That's where you're wrong," Sara said gently. "You were never nothing. You just convinced yourself that being feared was the same as being important, but it's not. Being genuinely liked, being respected for who you are rather than what you can do to people, that's real power." Chloe's facade finally cracked completely, tears streaming down her face. I don't know how to be anything else." "Then learn," Sara said simply. "It's not too late to be better." The changes at Willowbrook High weren't immediate or dramatic, but they were real. Students began sitting at different lunch tables, crossing invisible social boundaries that had existed for years. The art room became a refuge for kids who had previously eaten alone, with Lily emerging as an unexpected leader among the formerly outcast. Sara found herself in a strange position, respected but not feared, influential but not controlling. Students sought her advice, but she carefully avoided replacing Chloe's tyranny with her own version of leadership. "The goal isn't to be in charge," she explained to Kyle, who had become something of a lieutenant in the new social order. "The goal is to make sure no one person has too much power over others." Even Chloe began to change, slowly and tentatively. She started sitting alone at lunch, no longer surrounded by followers, but also no longer desperately performing for an audience. Sara watched her sometimes, noting the way she seemed to be discovering who she was beneath the cruelty. "Do you think she'd be okay?" Lily asked one day, following Sara's gaze. "I think she'd be better than okay," Sara replied. "It just takes time to learn how to be yourself instead of being what you think other people want you to be." Principal. Reed implemented new policies about bullying, but the real change came from the students themselves. They had learned that power didn't have to be wielded like a weapon. It could be shared, distributed, used to lift others up instead of tear. Them down. Spring came to Willowbrook High with a sense of renewal that went deeper than the changing seasons. Sara walked through hallways that felt fundamentally different from the ones she'd first entered months before. The atmosphere was lighter, more open, as if a weight had been lifted from the entire school. On her last day before graduation, Sara found herself in the art room where she'd had her final confrontation with Chloe. The space was full of students now, working on projects and talking quietly. Lily was teaching a small group how to mix colors, her confidence a stark contrast to the frightened girl Sara had first met. "You did this," Lily said, joining Sara by the window. "We all did this," Sara corrected. "I just got the ball rolling." "What's next for you?" Lily asked. "College?" Sara nodded, looking out at the parking lot where her mother was waiting to drive her home. "Military academy, then hopefully following in my mom's footsteps. But I'll never forget what I learned here." "What's that?" "That strength isn't about being the toughest or the meanest. It's about being brave enough to stand up for what's right, even when you're scared. Especially when you're scared." That evening, Sara sat with her mother on their back porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and gold. "I'm proud of you," Victoria said quietly. "You handled a difficult situation with wisdom and restraint." "I had a good teacher," Sara replied, leaning against her mother's shoulder. "You had good instincts. I just helped you trust them." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Sara reflected on her time at Willowbrook High. She had arrived as a quiet, unassuming girl trying to blend in, but she was leaving as someone who understood that true strength came from lifting others up rather than pushing them down. The lessons she'd learned would stay with her forever, that bullies were usually afraid, that standing up to them required courage but not cruelty, and that sometimes the most powerful thing you could do was simply refuse to play by rules that hurt innocent people. Willowbrook High would remember Sara Williams long after she graduated, not as the girl who destroyed a queen bee, but as the one who showed everyone that they didn't need a queen at all. They could govern themselves with kindness, respect, and the quiet strength that comes from knowing who you are and what you stand for. The legacy she left behind wasn't fear or intimidation. It was the knowledge that every person had the power to choose courage over comfort, and that sometimes the most important battles were fought not with fists or cruel words, but with the simple act of refusing to let others define your worth. Sara Williams had learned to be strong without being hard, powerful without being cruel. And that was a lesson that would serve her well in all the battles yet to come. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.